The maintenance hangar at Kandahar Airfield hummed with the usual symphony of grinding metal and cursing mechanics. Staff Sergeant Zara Wraith Nakamura knelt beside the broken Reaper drone, her calloused fingers tracing the damaged sensor array with surgical precision. Most would see twisted metal and fried circuits. She saw patterns, stories written in scorch marks and severed cables. The drone had taken a hit 3 clicks south of Fob Chapman, but something about the damage felt wrong. Too precise. Too deliberate. The morning briefing had been routine. Another reconnaissance mission over the Kunar province, another day of watching shadows move through valleys where coalition forces feared to tread. But this drone had been tracking something specific before it went down. The flight data recorder showed erratic movements in its final minutes, as if the pilot had been trying to avoid something that shouldn't have been there. Zara's tool kit lay spread across the concrete floor like a surgeon's instruments. She'd earned her nickname not for stealth, but for her ability to resurrect aircraft that others had given up for dead. 12 years in the Air Force, 4 deployments, and a reputation for working miracles with nothing but spare parts and stubbornness. Yet despite her technical expertise, the old guard still saw her as the maintenance chief's daughter who'd gotten lucky with a commission. The damaged sensor housing came apart in her hands, revealing circuitry that made her breath catch. The wiring had been severed, but not by shrapnel or conventional explosive. These cuts were clean, purposeful. Someone had known exactly which systems to target. She photographed the damage with her phone, her mind already cataloging the implications. Colonel Marcus Reeves approached from behind, his boot steps echoing in the cavernous hangar. Most officers avoided the maintenance bays, preferring the air-conditioned comfort of briefing rooms. But Reeves was different. He'd flown combat missions over Baghdad when Zara was still in high school, and he understood that wars were won by people who could think with their hands as much as their heads. "What's the verdict, Wraith?" His voice carried the weight of too many difficult conversations. Zara stood, wiping grease from her fingers with a red shop rag. "Sir, this wasn't battle damage. Someone knew exactly how to disable our surveillance package without destroying the airframe. They wanted us to recover this bird." The colonel's weathered face remained impassive, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. "Show me." She pointed to the severed connections, explaining the technical details in clipped, professional sentences. But when she mentioned the precision of the cuts, Reeves went completely still. His gaze shifted to the small patch on her flight suit, a stylized aircraft silhouette with crossed lightning bolts beneath. Most assumed it was squadron insignia. "Ghost cell," he whispered, and the hangar seemed to grow colder. Zara's blood turned to ice. That phrase existed in classified briefings and late-night conversations between intelligence officers. It was a legend, a boogeyman story told to fresh lieutenants about enemy operatives with impossible capabilities. But the way Reeves stared at her patch suggested something far more terrifying. The ghost cell was real, and somehow she was connected to it. The maintenance hangar felt different now, as if the shadows had grown deeper and more attentive. Zara's mind raced through the implications of what the colonel had just revealed. Ghost Cell wasn't just another terrorist organization or foreign intelligence service. According to the whispered rumors she'd overheard in classified briefings, they were something else entirely. A network of operators who seemed to anticipate coalition movements with supernatural accuracy. Colonel Reeves glanced around the hangar, ensuring they were alone among the aircraft carcasses and tool carts. "That patch, Sergeant, where did you get it?" Zara's hand unconsciously moved to the emblem on her chest. "My father gave it to me before my first deployment, said it belonged to his old squadron." The words felt inadequate, suddenly heavy with implications she'd never considered. Her father had died when she was 16, taking most of his military stories with him. "What squadron?" Reeves' voice had dropped to barely audible. He never said specifically, just called them the Night Ravens, classified reconnaissance work in the 80s. She'd always assumed it was Vietnam War nostalgia, the kind of faded glory stories that filled VFW halls across America. The colonel's expression shifted from concern to something approaching fear. He pulled out his secure phone, fingers moving across the screen with urgent precision. "I need you to come with me. Now." They walked through the base in silence, past rows of armored vehicles and shipping containers that had been converted into living quarters. The Afghan sun beat down mercilessly, but Zara felt cold. The colonel led her to a nondescript building near the intelligence section, the kind of place where careers went to die and secrets were buried in filing cabinets. Inside, the air conditioning hummed with artificial efficiency. Fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving clarity. Reeves gestured to a conference room where two other officers waited, a major she didn't recognize and Captain Elena Vasquez from intelligence. "Gentlemen, this is Staff Sergeant Nakamura," Reeves announced, "the one who discovered the anomalies in the drone wreckage." The major studied her with the calculating gaze of someone who evaluated threats for a living. "Sergeant, we need to discuss your family history, specifically your father's service record." Zara felt the world shift beneath her feet. "Sir, my father flew transport missions, nothing classified or operational." Captain Vasquez opened a thick folder, revealing photographs and documents stamped with security classifications that made Zara's security clearance look like a library card. "Actually, Sergeant, your father was part of a very different kind of operation. The Night Ravens weren't a squadron in any traditional sense." The first photograph showed a man she barely recognized as her father, 20 years younger, and wearing flight gear she'd never seen. He stood beside an aircraft that shouldn't have existed, something sleek and angular that belonged more in science fiction than military history. "The Night Ravens were an experimental program," the major continued. "Deep black operations using prototype technology. Your father and his team were testing aircraft and systems that wouldn't enter regular service for decades." Zara stared at the photographs, her understanding of her own history crumbling. "What does this have to do with the drone attack?" "Everything," Colonel Reeves said grimly. "Because the Ghost Cell isn't just any enemy organization. They're former Night Ravens operators who went rogue 15 years ago, and if they're targeting you specifically, it means they know exactly who you are." The room fell silent except for the mechanical hum of the air conditioning. Zara felt like she was drowning in implications she couldn't fully grasp. Her father's legacy, her own career, even her presence in Afghanistan, none of it was coincidence. The colonel placed another photograph on the table. It showed her father standing with 5 other men beside the same impossible aircraft. But one face had been circled in red ink, and someone had written, "Confirmed KIA Somalia 2009, beneath it. "That's Marcus Webb," Captain Vasquez explained. "He was your father's wingman and best friend. According to our intelligence, he's now the operational commander of the Ghost Cell." The maintenance hangar where this had all started felt like a lifetime ago. Zara stared at the photograph of her father's old wingman, trying to reconcile the young pilot's face with the idea of a terrorist mastermind. The resemblance to her father was striking. The same intense eyes, the same confident posture that suggested someone comfortable with impossible odds. Marcus Webb was declared killed in action during a classified mission over Somalia, Captain Vasquez continued, her voice clinical but not unkind. His aircraft was shot down during what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance flight. We never recovered his body. Major Harrison, the intelligence officer she hadn't been introduced to, leaned forward. "What we've learned in the past 18 months is that Webb survived the crash. More than that, he was captured by hostile forces and held for nearly 2 years before escaping. When he finally made contact with friendly forces, something had changed." Zara found her voice. "Changed how?" "He'd been turned," Colonel Reeves said bluntly. "Whether through torture, ideological conversion, or something else, Marcus Webb came back as a different person. The Night Ravens program was shut down 6 months after his return, officially due to budget constraints. Unofficially, because 3 more operators had gone missing under suspicious circumstances. The photographs on the table told a story of brotherhood and betrayal that made Zara's chest tight. Her father had never mentioned losing friends, never spoken about operations that ended badly. But looking at these images of young men who trusted each other with their lives, she began to understand the weight he'd carried. Webb took classified information when he disappeared, Major Harrison explained. Technical specifications, operational procedures, personnel files, everything he needed to create an organization that could anticipate our moves and exploit our weaknesses. And now he's here, Captain Vasquez added. The Ghost Cell's operational pattern has shifted in the past 6 months. Instead of random attacks on coalition forces, they're targeting specific individuals with connections to the old Night Ravens program. Zara felt the implications settling over her like a lead blanket. He's hunting the families of his former teammates. We believe so. Your father's former squadron leader was killed in a car accident in Germany last year. The pilot who replaced Webb after Somalia died in what appeared to be a climbing accident in Colorado. All seemingly random, all plausibly accidental. The colonel's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression grew even more grim. That was base security. Someone breached the perimeter near the communications array 20 minutes ago. They left something behind. He slid his phone across the table, showing a photograph taken by base security cameras. A small package had been left on the antenna array's access ladder, wrapped in canvas and tied with paracord. But it was the marking on the canvas that made Zara's blood run cold. Someone had painted the Night Ravens insignia in what looked like blood. Inside the package, according to the security team's initial report, was a single item. Her father's missing dog tags, the ones she'd assumed were lost when his personal effects were returned after his death. But these tags had been modified, engraved with new information that changed everything she thought she knew about her father's final mission. Marcus Webb wants to meet, Colonel Reeves said quietly, and he wants to meet with you. The afternoon heat shimmered off the tarmac as Zara walked toward the communications array, her mind reeling from revelations that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The base's normal rhythm continued around her, supply trucks rumbling past, helicopters cycling through landing patterns, soldiers moving with the purposeful efficiency of people who understood their roles in a larger machine. But everything felt different now, as if she was seeing through a veil that had suddenly been lifted. The package waited exactly where the security cameras had recorded it, though now it was surrounded by a perimeter of military police and explosive ordnance specialists. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the base's senior EOD technician, approached as she arrived with her escort of intelligence officers. "It's clean," he reported. "No explosives, no chemical agents, just what appears to be personal effects and a handwritten note." Major Harrison nodded permission, and Rodriguez carefully opened the canvas wrapping. Inside, nestled in military-issue foam padding, were her father's dog tags and a folded piece of paper covered in handwriting she didn't recognize. But there was something else, a photograph of her father and Marcus Webb standing beside their aircraft, taken apparently just hours before Webb's final mission. Captain Vasquez read the note aloud. "Zara, your father spoke of you often during our last conversation. He would be proud of the officer you've become, but disappointed in the lies you've been told about his death. The Night Ravens program didn't end because of budget cuts. It ended because your father discovered what we were really being asked to do. If you want the truth about how he died, meet me at grid coordinates 34, 516 degrees N, 69, 182 degrees E tomorrow at 2100 hours. Come alone and bring the flight data from the drone you repaired. Marcus. The coordinates placed the meeting site in a valley 30 kilometers northwest of the base, well within insurgent-controlled territory. It might as well have been on the moon for all the chance the Army would approve a solo mission into hostile territory. Absolutely not, Colonel Reeves said before anyone could ask the obvious question. This is textbook enemy manipulation. Webb wants to isolate you, possibly capture you for leverage or intelligence value. But Zara was studying the photograph, noticing details that the intelligence officers had missed. Her father and Webb weren't just posing beside their aircraft. They were performing some kind of pre-flight inspection, checking systems and equipment with the focused attention of professionals who trusted their lives to mechanical perfection. It was the same ritual she performed before every flight, inherited habits that connected her to a father she'd barely known. "There's something else," she said quietly. "The drone attack wasn't random. Whoever disabled it knew exactly which systems to target because they understood our reconnaissance capabilities, but they left the navigation system intact." Major Harrison frowned. "What's your point, Sergeant?" "The navigation system recorded exactly where the drone was when it was attacked. If I overlay that data with the coordinates Webb provided, they're less than 2 kilometers apart. He's not asking me to meet him somewhere random. He's asking me to meet him where something happened to one of our assets." The intelligence officers exchanged glances that suggested implications beyond Zara's clearance level. Captain Vasquez opened her secure laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed databases that existed in digital vaults beneath the Pentagon. "Jesus," she whispered after several minutes of typing. The drone was conducting surveillance on a suspected weapons cache when it was disabled, but according to the imagery analysis, there was no weapons cache at those coordinates. The target was a memorial. She turned the laptop screen toward the group, showing high-resolution satellite imagery of a barren hillside marked only by a small pile of stones arranged in a precise pattern. It looked like nothing, just another anonymous piece of Afghan landscape. But when Vasquez overlaid the drone's final telemetry data, the pattern became clear. Someone had arranged the stones to form the Night Raven's insignia, visible only from directly overhead. The weight of military bureaucracy pressed down on Zara like a physical force as she sat in the base commander's office, surrounded by officers whose combined experience spanned decades of asymmetric warfare and intelligence operations. The walls were covered with maps, unit citations, and photographs of previous commanders stretching back to the Soviet occupation. But none of those men had faced a situation quite like this. Brigadier General Patricia Matthews had flown in from Bagram specifically for this briefing, her presence indicating that the Ghost Cell situation had escalated beyond local command authority. She was a helicopter pilot by background, someone who understood both the technical aspects of Zara's analysis and the operational implications of Webb's challenge. "Let me understand this correctly," General Matthews said, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone accustomed to making decisions with incomplete information. "A former Night Raven's operator, presumed dead for 15 years, has somehow orchestrated a precision attack on our reconnaissance assets, specifically to get the attention of the daughter of his former wingman." "That's our assessment, ma'am," Major Harrison confirmed. "Marcus Webb appears to have detailed knowledge of Sergeant Nakamura's presence here, her technical capabilities, and her family background." Zara had remained silent through most of the briefing, but now she felt compelled to speak. "General, with respect, I think we're missing something important. Webb didn't just leave coordinates for a meeting. He left them for a memorial that's been there for years, completely undetected by our surveillance systems." "Explain." "The stone arrangement that formed the Night Raven's insignia, satellite imagery shows it's been there for at least 3 years, based on vegetation growth patterns around the perimeter. Webb didn't create it recently. He's been planning this contact for a very long time." Colonel Reeves leaned forward, his expression grim, which suggests this isn't just about settling old scores or gathering intelligence. Webb has been systematically working toward this specific moment. General Matthews studied the satellite imagery on her tablet, her pilot's eye picking out details that the intelligence analysts had missed. The positioning is too precise to be accidental. Those stones are arranged so the insignia is only visible from a specific altitude and approach angle. Whoever built this knew exactly how our reconnaissance flights would survey this area. There's something else, Captain Vasquez added reluctantly. We've been analyzing communication intercepts from the past 6 months. The ghost cell has been unusually quiet during periods when Sergeant Nakamura was scheduled for maintenance duties on reconnaissance aircraft, as if they were waiting for her to discover something specific. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Zara felt the weight of eyes turning toward her, assessing her not just as a technical expert but as a potential asset or liability in a game whose rules she was only beginning to understand. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Zara asked. General Matthews nodded. "I don't think Marcus Webb is trying to recruit me or harm me. I think he's trying to tell me something about my father's death that the official records don't include. And whatever that information is, he believes it's important enough to risk exposing his entire organization." "That's quite a leap, Sergeant." "Ma'am, I've spent my entire career working with people who take calculated risks. Webb could have killed me a dozen times since I arrived in Afghanistan if that was his objective. Instead, he's gone to extraordinary lengths to establish communication while demonstrating capabilities that should terrify us. This isn't the behavior of someone planning an attack." The general's expression suggested she was weighing options that existed far above Zara's pay grade. "What do you recommend, Sergeant?" The question surprised everyone in the room, including Zara herself. Staff sergeants didn't typically provide strategic recommendations to flag officers, but something in General Matthews' tone suggested that conventional military hierarchy had become irrelevant to this situation. "I recommend we meet him," Zara said quietly, "but not alone and not on his terms." The planning session stretched deep into the night, transforming the intelligence briefing room into a tactical operations center filled with satellite phones, encrypted laptops, and the nervous energy of people preparing for something unprecedented. Zara found herself at the center of discussions that normally excluded anyone below field grade rank, her technical expertise and unique connection to Marcus Webb making her an essential element of whatever operation was taking shape. Captain Elena Vasquez had emerged as the primary planner, her intelligence background providing the framework for what she kept calling an unconventional engagement protocol. On the surface, it sounded like military jargon. In reality, they were planning to send Zara into hostile territory to meet with one of the most wanted terrorists in Southwest Asia. "The key is layered overwatch," Vasquez explained, pointing to a tactical map that showed the meeting coordinates surrounded by concentric circles of surveillance and support positions. "Webb expects you to come alone, but that doesn't mean you have to be alone." Major Harrison had been working with the base's Special Operations Liaison to identify assets that could provide covert security without triggering Webb's probable counter-surveillance measures. "We have a Ranger reconnaissance team that can establish positions along the likely approach routes. They'll be invisible from ground level, but able to provide immediate response if things go wrong." Zara studied the map, her maintenance background helping her visualize the mechanical complexity of the proposed operation. "What about electronic surveillance? If Webb has been tracking our reconnaissance capabilities, he'll be expecting us to have technical coverage of the meeting site." "That's where your expertise becomes crucial," Colonel Reeves said. "We need you to carry recording equipment that looks like standard maintenance tools, something that won't trigger suspicion but will capture whatever Webb wants to tell you." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a figure Zara hadn't expected to see. Chief Master Sergeant Diana Torres, the base's senior enlisted advisor, and someone whose reputation extended throughout the Air Force. Torres had flown combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan for more than 2 decades, and her presence indicated that this operation had risen to the highest levels of command attention. "Sergeant Nakamura," Torres said without preamble, "I knew your father." The room fell silent. Torres continued, her voice carrying the weight of memories that had clearly been classified for years. "David Nakamura was the finest aircraft systems engineer I ever worked with. But more than that, he was someone who asked difficult questions when the rest of us were content to follow orders." "Chief, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that your father didn't die in a training accident, and the Night Ravens program wasn't shut down for budget reasons. David discovered that some of the technology we were testing had applications that violated international law. When he tried to raise concerns through official channels, he was told to stay quiet and follow orders." General Matthews had been listening from the doorway, and now she stepped into the room. "Chief Torres, how much does Sergeant Nakamura need to know?" "All of it, ma'am. Because if Marcus Webb is really trying to expose what happened to the Night Ravens program, then Sergeant Nakamura is walking into something much bigger than a personal vendetta." Torres opened a briefcase that had been sealed with multiple security locks, revealing documents that bore classification markings Zara had never seen. "The Night Ravens weren't just testing aircraft, Sergeant. They were testing weapons systems designed to disable enemy electronics from extreme range. Prototype directed energy weapons that could shut down entire military installations without causing casualties." The implication struck Zara like a physical blow. "Electronic warfare weapons." "Exactly. And your father discovered that some of those weapons were being tested on civilian targets. Villages in countries where we weren't supposed to have any military presence. David documented everything and was preparing to report it when his aircraft experienced what was officially termed catastrophic systems failure." "You're saying he was murdered?" "I'm saying that Marcus Webb was supposed to be flying that mission with your father. At the last minute, Webb was reassigned to a different aircraft. David died alone, carrying evidence that could have exposed war crimes committed by people who are probably still in positions of authority." The meeting room had become a place where family history intersected with classified operations in ways that made Zara's head spin. But one thing was becoming clear. Webb's request for a meeting wasn't about revenge or recruitment. It was about justice for her father and accountability for crimes that had been buried in classified files for 15 years. "So when I meet Webb tomorrow night," she said quietly, "I'm not just representing myself. I'm representing my father's unfinished mission." General Matthews nodded grimly. "Which makes this operation about much more than counterterrorism. It makes it about the integrity of the entire Night Ravens program and everyone who was part of it." The pre-dawn hours at Kandahar Airfield carried a different quality of tension, as if the base itself understood that something unprecedented was about to unfold. Zara had spent the night in fitful sleep, her dreams filled with images of her father and aircraft that shouldn't have existed. Now, as she prepared her equipment for the evening's mission, every familiar routine felt weighted with significance beyond the mechanical. Her maintenance kit had been carefully modified by the base's technical intelligence specialists. Hidden among the standard diagnostic tools were recording devices, so sophisticated they appeared to be nothing more than routine electronic components. A small camera had been integrated into what looked like a standard multimeter, and her service radio had been equipped with burst transmission capability that could send encrypted data to orbiting satellites. "The key is maintaining your normal behavior patterns," Captain Vasquez reminded her as they conducted a final equipment check. "Webb will be evaluating everything, your posture, your responses, even the way you handle your tools. He knew your father well enough to spot anything that seems forced or artificial. Zara clipped the modified multimeter to her belt alongside the other diagnostic equipment, feeling the weight of technology that represented millions of dollars in research and development. What if he's not there? What if this whole thing is an elaborate trap designed to capture intelligence assets? Then the Ranger teams will extract you before you can be compromised, Major Harrison assured her. But honestly, Sergeant, I don't think that's Webb's objective. Everything about his approach suggests someone who wants to communicate, not someone planning an ambush. The morning briefing had revealed additional intelligence that painted an even more complex picture of Marcus Webb's activities since his disappearance. Financial records showed the Ghost Cell had been funded through a network of anonymous donors, many of whom appeared to have connections to defense contractors involved in the original Night Ravens program. It suggested a level of institutional support that went far beyond a simple terrorist organization. Webb isn't just a rogue operator, Colonel Reeves had explained. He's part of a broader network of people who believe the Night Ravens program represented a corruption of military values. Some of them are probably still serving in positions where they have access to classified information. The implications were staggering. If Webb was right about the program's darker aspects, then the Ghost Cell might represent an internal resistance movement rather than an external threat. But if he was wrong, then Zara was walking into a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation designed to compromise American military capabilities. Chief Master Sergeant Torres found her in the maintenance hangar as the afternoon wore on, ostensibly checking routine work orders but clearly there for a different purpose. "Your father would have been proud of how you're handling this situation," she said quietly. "Chief, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think my father would have wanted me to take this risk? Meeting with someone who might be responsible for terrorist attacks on coalition forces?" Torres was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the hangar walls. "Your father believed that the truth was worth almost any personal cost. He also believed that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shooting at you from across a battlefield. It's the one giving you orders from behind a desk." "Are you saying I can't trust the people sending me on this mission?" "I'm saying that everyone involved in this situation has agendas that go beyond your safety or even your father's legacy. General Matthews is a good officer, but she's also someone who built her career on programs that might be connected to what your father discovered. Colonel Reeves flew missions that used Night Ravens technology. Even I have connections to classified projects that might be compromised if certain information becomes public." The afternoon shadows were growing longer, bringing the evening's mission closer to reality. Zara felt the weight of family history and military obligation pulling her in directions she couldn't fully understand. But one thing was becoming clear. Whatever happened at tonight's meeting would change everything she thought she knew about her father, her service, and her own role in a conflict that extended far beyond Afghanistan. "Chief, what should I do?" "Listen to what Marcus Webb has to say. But remember that the truth is often more complicated than any single person's version of events. Your father taught me that the most important question isn't whether someone is right or wrong. It's whether they're willing to accept the consequences of being wrong." The sun was setting over the Hindu Kush Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Zara why people had fought over this land for thousands of years. In 3 hours, she would be face to face with a man who had shared her father's deepest secrets and might hold the key to understanding how those secrets had led to his death. The helicopter lifted off from Kandahar airfield at 20:30 hours, its rotors chopping through air that still held the day's heat like a physical presence. Zara sat in the cargo bay surrounded by Rangers, whose faces were painted with camouflage that made them look like shadows given human form. None of them had spoken since takeoff, their silence reflecting the weight of a mission that existed outside normal operational parameters. Through the aircraft's small windows, Afghanistan scrolled past in monochrome shades of gray and black. Villages appeared as clusters of lights surrounded by darkness that could hide anything from innocent farmers to insurgent training camps. The landscape looked peaceful from altitude, but Zara knew that illusion would disappear the moment they reached the ground. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, the Ranger team leader, finally broke the silence as they approached the landing zone. "Remember, we'll be invisible but not absent. Webb might have counter-surveillance, but our job is to make sure you come home safe regardless of what he wants to discuss." The landing zone was a flat area 2 kilometers from the meeting coordinates, chosen because it offered concealment from ground observation, while providing the Rangers with multiple approach routes to their overwatch positions. As the helicopter settled onto the rocky ground, Zara felt the familiar flutter of pre-mission adrenaline mixed with something deeper, the knowledge that she was about to confront mysteries that had shaped her entire life. "Radio check every 15 minutes, Chen reminded her as she shouldered her equipment bag. "If you miss a check or use any of the duress codes, we'll be at your position in under 3 minutes." The helicopter lifted off immediately after dropping them, disappearing into the darkness with only the fatting sound of rotors to mark its passage. Zara was alone in hostile territory for the first time in her military career, surrounded by landscape that looked like the surface of an alien planet under the star-filled sky. The walk to the meeting coordinates took 40 minutes, following a route that Captain Vasquez had plotted to avoid known insurgent positions while providing natural cover from observation. Zara's night vision equipment turned the world into a green-tinted dreamscape where every shadow could conceal threats or allies. The Rangers had already melted into positions around the meeting site, invisible even to her enhanced vision. The memorial was exactly as the satellite imagery had depicted, a careful arrangement of stones that formed the Night Raven's insignia when viewed from above. But standing beside it, Zara could see details that hadn't been visible in the photographs. Someone had carved her father's initials into one of the larger stones, along with a date that corresponded to his final mission. It was a monument to betrayal and sacrifice that had stood undetected in enemy territory for years. "I wasn't sure you would come." The voice emerged from the darkness beyond the stone circle, calm and familiar despite the fact that she'd never heard it before. Marcus Webb stepped into the moonlight, and Zara's breath caught in her throat. He looked exactly like her father might have looked after 15 years of war and exile, weathered, scarred, but still carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to impossible situations. "You look like him," Webb continued, his voice carrying an emotion that might have been grief or regret. "David talked about you constantly during our last conversation. He was worried about the kind of world he was leaving for you to inherit." Zara found her voice. "According to the official records, my father died in a training accident, but you're suggesting something different." Webb laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Training accident. That's what they called it when David's aircraft experienced total systems failure over the Nevada test range. Convenient timing, considering he was carrying evidence that could have exposed war crimes committed by people who are probably still giving orders to your current commanders." "What kind of evidence?" "Technical specifications for directed energy weapons that were tested on civilian targets. Financial records showing defense contractors billing the government for research that violated international law. And most importantly, communication intercepts proving that senior military officials knew about the illegal testing and ordered it to continue." Webb reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that looked like a military-grade data storage unit. "Everything your father collected is on here. Technical schematics, financial documents, recorded conversations between people whose names you would recognize from current Pentagon briefings." "Why are you giving this to me instead of releasing it publicly?" "Because I want justice, not chaos. If this information were released through normal intelligence channels, It would disappear into classified archives where it could be suppressed indefinitely. But if it comes from you, the daughter of a man who died trying to expose these crimes, it becomes much harder to ignore. The weight of family legacy and military obligation seemed to compress around Zara like a physical force. In her hands, she held evidence that could destroy careers, end programs, and possibly prevent future war crimes. But she also held the power to destabilize military operations that might be protecting American lives around the world. What happened to my father on his final mission? Webb's expression grew even more grim. David was flying solo because I was supposed to be dead. The mission to Somalia had been a setup designed to eliminate me before I could corroborate his evidence. When I survived and made it back to friendly territory, they realized they had to deal with David directly. They sabotaged his aircraft. Remote override of the flight control systems. Technology that officially didn't exist, used to murder someone who was trying to prevent war crimes. Your father died because he believed the truth was worth more than his own life. In the distance, Zara could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors approaching. Either her extraction was arriving early, or someone else had decided that this conversation had gone on long enough. Webb heard it too, his posture shifting to the alert readiness of someone who had spent years evading sophisticated enemies. "You have a choice to make, Zara," he said urgently. "You can return to base and pretend this conversation never happened, or you can honor your father's sacrifice by making sure his evidence reaches people who can act on it." The data storage device felt heavier than its physical weight suggested, loaded with implications that could reshape her understanding of everything she'd believed about military service and moral obligation. In the growing sound of approaching aircraft, she could hear the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of something much more complex. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Webb smiled sadly. "Because you're David Nakamura's daughter, and he raised you to ask the right questions even when you don't want to hear the answers." The helicopter sound was growing louder, accompanied by the distant crack of small arms fire that suggested the evening's activities had attracted unwanted attention from local insurgent forces. Whatever decision Zara made, she had to make it now, surrounded by the memorial to her father's courage and the weight of choices that would echo through generations of military families. She looked at Marcus Webb one final time, seeing in his weathered features the ghost of the young pilot who had once trusted her father with his life. "My father would have wanted the truth to survive, regardless of the cost." Webb nodded as she secured the data storage device in her equipment bag. "Then make sure it does." The extraction helicopter appeared over the ridgeline like a mechanical angel, its searchlight cutting through darkness that suddenly erupted with muzzle flashes from multiple positions. Insurgent forces had been monitoring the meeting site, waiting for an opportunity to engage what they probably assumed was a high-value target meeting. The Rangers' carefully planned overwatch positions became combat positions as the night exploded into chaos. Zara found herself pressed against the stone memorial as automatic weapons fire swept the area where she'd been standing moments before. Webb had vanished into the darkness with the practiced Invis.